Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today I'm honoured to speak with Near Protocol, and with me I have one of the co-founders. His name is Illia, and he is here to explain not just the technological aspects, but all of the updates, everything that Near has been doing since I last spoke with another co-founder. His name was Alex. So Illia, thank you very much for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Hi Brad, yeah, it's really appreciate to be here too.
No worries, mate. Now, obviously, there's some interesting things happening right now in the Near Protocol headquarters. There's a hackathon going on. How is that going?
It's great. They're wrapping up right now and presenting. It's just an internal hackathon for us. We call it a forced dogfooding, which is like a term from like Google and Facebook, where people are pretty much use their own tools to make sure they work. So we kind of doing the same. Engineers on the team pretty much try to build different dApps for a day, and kind of we collect a lot of feedback from that and pretty much work on fixing that over time. So they're presenting right now kind of internally what they built and what issues they saw.
Right. I normally don't start with something like that, but because you are doing something that's current and real world and in real time, it's relevant that I suppose people know that you have that traction, you have that interest in the community. But let's now move back to some of those fundamentals for a moment, Illia. We need to address what exactly Near is once again, because for those who aren't, technologically savvy, understanding sharding is very complex. That's one of the key components of your design. Let's start with decentralization first, to talk us through the public nature and most importantly, the buzzword for you, and that's usability.
Yeah, so Near on a high level is like, we call it developer-friendly, usable, and scalable blockchain. Mm-hmm. What does this actually mean is that there is, a whole Web 2 world where people achieve scale. There's a lot of kind of interesting products being built, but actually the Web 2 on like a macro trend is actually kind of slowly shutting down. Like there's less and less new startups. There's a lot less funding in new consumer applications because like Facebook and Google kind of build this walled gardens and they like collapsing the space in a way. So what blockchain allows to do, right, like on the high level is kind of decentralize this, allows application to interact with each other, not have this walled gardens, own your data, etc. But, Ethereum did a great work at like kind of trailing the path of like how can we put applications on the blockchain and decentralize them, but it's not usable, right? Like mostly people are not using it. If not, like the only kind of usages were ICO and, doing speculation on the price. And the reason is because it's really hard to develop for it, right? You actually need to be like very sophisticated developer. You need to like account for a lot of things. And at the end, like tooling constantly breaks. And it's like, I've talked with a few companies that are developing for Ethereum, and they're like, yeah, we have, 2-3 engineers building, 2-3 engineers just maintaining infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's like, 50-50 kind of split between this. And then on the user side, it's actually super complex to use blockchain, right? Like you need to know about public keys, private keys, manage all that, etc. So what we're trying to do is kind of solve all these problems as like a cohesive process. Is like, how can we make both developer experience really
seamless?
Yeah, seamless for people who are not from blockchain, right? Like our target, so that a maybe mobile engineer or web engineer can go and build a smart contract within like 15 minutes, deploy it on a blockchain, and start using it in his front end. That's kind of like the target we go in, right? And then from there, you can start building like more and more sophisticated applications, of course. But like the start should be simple.
And Illia, it's quite interesting because I've researched your background and also some of your team, and we'll discuss this in detail later, but you do come from a Google background, and it's quite interesting in the sense that that is a centralized entity. No doubt you are averse to some of those, ideals that they uphold. Talk us through that. What prompted you to move across into this platform to represent Near and to build this out as a co-founder?
So, I mean, like I like Google as a company, and it's a great place to work for sure. I think from like a macro level, the fact that there's like this huge companies that kind of slowly pretty much usurping all of the market, right? And at the end, you're pretty much choosing if you like going to work to like use Google or going to use, another walled garden, and kind of like there's no collaboration between them. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like a big issue. And especially, I actually left Google to start a different company. We were working on an AI company before the blockchain with Alex. And kind of our experience is that it's actually really hard to compete with Google. So like, even if you're not really working on the same thing as Google does, like if you just in any way touching like on talent, on any type of problems that you're trying to solve, or like products you're trying to solve, it's really hard to actually build a product that will, even if it's better product, that will compete with like something that Google may be like doing as a kind of a secondary thing.
Right. Is that because they have the monopoly in the marketplace?
They have monopolies. They have like they suck in all the talent. They kind of create this like locked-in platform, right? Where let's say in the world where like users could have freely moved their data and gave access to this data to some smaller company, that smaller company could have competed very well. But because the data is locked in, the smaller company cannot actually have access to it. So, and data becoming like more and more driving factors for many companies to success, right?
Right. Well, let's talk about though the change of agenda, because clearly that's going to be fundamental for the success of NEAR, and that is this transition into a decentralized viewpoint. You mentioned that you like Google, but let's be real for a moment. You mustn't like it too much. You're not with them anymore. What's that one point you don't like? Is it the aspect of centralization? And is really what you're trying to do is really tip it on its head?
I mean, for sure, like the fact that, it's all stored in one place, it's like the access that they're given is only pretty much like the employees, and more high level, it's driven by like stakeholders, right? Not by the users. Like, so even if there is a user voice that say, hey, we want this type of integration, or we want this type of feature or whatever, at the end, this is not what will be driving decisions. And like Google is, may or may not be like clear example, but I think like Facebook at the moment is kind of a clear thing, right? Where the shareholders and value like for shareholders is clearly driving a lot of decision making when users are really not satisfied with the product.
Right.
And
so you're very user centric, and I want to talk to that for a moment. Now, you've built out a very strong suite of tools for the user. You mentioned not just for the dev savvy person who wants to apply this utilizing blockchain. Talk us through that. How robust is this suite that you've built, and how easily accessible is it?
So I wouldn't say like that what we have right now. So we still pre-testnet. It is coming within like few weeks, kind of our first version of testnet. But I would say like we're going to continue building, especially for user in months to come. The vision we have is that it's like the user starts fully transparent that they use a blockchain application, right? So let's say, if I want to play a game, if this game uses blockchain to store that, like, my magic swords, I shouldn't need to worry about that when I just start the game. Like I shouldn't need to install MetaMask and go through the process and sign up for Coinbase, because that's the only way I can get some Ethereum right now, et cetera, right? I should be able to like start playing the game, acquire an item, and then when I want to like trade it, or I want to, exchange it or something, when I want to actually extract some value out of it, I can go and interact with blockchain and kind of have this process like very smooth and like value first, then, any kind of sign up process, et cetera.
I see.
So that's kind of how we're optimizing it for.
There's also that narrative of the NFTs, of those non-fungible tokens. They align with this similar thing that you're talking about, making sure that people can trade things that they create and own, which has never been done before, in that transference of data and ownership into other domains.
Exactly.
Let's talk about how, though, the sharding itself is really important, because that is novel. It's something that you guys have designed. Talk us through in the best way you can to try and demystify the sharding that is really the bedrock of your platform.
Sure. So just kind of for the background, right? One of the like usability problems of existing blockchains, and it's the same problems that was like 15 years ago with a Web 2, is that it doesn't scale, right? As soon as you get like to some reasonable, like even small to reasonable amount of users, pretty much your application starts to block the whole system. And that is, not great user experience at the end. And especially in the blockchain, because it's like a shared space, pretty much all the applications run on the same system. one application usage will pretty much block everybody else. That's what happened like last year with CryptoKitties. So what sharding allows to do is actually to remove this issue. And that's, again, it's coming from what people have figured out already in Web 2. This is what, Google, Facebooks, etc. have been doing. That's what Alex at MemSQL built for a database. The idea is that you pretty much split the computation, split the data between many different machines, right? So instead of everything is being processed by every single machine in the network, you actually have some subsets of the networks that process different parts, and then they communicate between each other to synchronize on specific pieces that needs to be done. So like an example would be, if you have a CryptoKitties contract and, you have CryptoKitties from 1 to 1,000 on one set of machines, from 1,001 to 2,000 on other set. And if you're trading CryptoKitties between 1,000 to 2,000, they will only be interacting with this set of machines. Like the other set doesn't need to know if something happening with that CryptoKitties at all. And
I see. Sorry to interrupt, but is that with regard to clustering, the way in which you designed it?
Pretty much, yeah. So this is like allows to split into this like sub blockchains you can think of, where each one of them operate kind of semi-independently, except for the communication between them. And I mean, the design is way more complicated just because like blockchain requires a lot more hand-holding, and we have like a pretty extensive blog post on this topic, but kind of high-level design is this.
Sure. Now, obviously, sharding is not something that's solely affiliated with you. There are other blockchains doing sharding. Essentially, that is, as you mentioned, the illusions of side chains, the parallel scaling, really trying to bolster the scalability. That's what it's all about. So what really sets your sharding technique apart, though? You've mentioned that basic, you had given that basic response, but let's talk about some of the more technical components for a moment to really evidence and suggest why you can win in the sharding race.
So I think the main value, and like we are in open source world, right? All of the research is open except for maybe a few companies, and we're trying to be very collaborative. So here, the kind of our main stake, pretty much in this world, is that we're going to execute faster than anybody else, right? So we, for example, work really closely with the Ethereum community, and some of their ideas are very bright and great, and we can just adopt them. But we believe we can execute way faster than Ethereum folks at building these things for Ethereum can. And kind of this coming from, both that our team have built sharding applications before, have built distributed systems before, and also the fact that we are one team sitting kind of in one room and hacking on this like whole day versus, for example, Ethereum teams are pretty much distributed. They doing it part-time, et cetera, et cetera.
I see. So you're a scaling specialist. So in that context, I want to ask you directly, we've seen Thunder, for example, come through and support, I think they're supporting Ethereum, and also they're supporting Hyperledger. So are you suggesting that you'll also consider doing something like that, where you'd help out with the support for that public chain that is well known already, arguably, ideally decentralized Ethereum? Or are you planning to be your own solution and your own layer one?
So we're definitely our own layer one, and this coming from like both implementing sharding correctly requires full redesign of the system. And I mean, again, all the folks know that who are actually building like sharding. So even in Ethereum, they're actually fully rebuilding everything from scratch. And that's why it's going to take them like 3 to 5 years, because they're like doing it very slowly. So you cannot actually take like existing blockchain and like kind of scale it up. Just because you need to actually redesign. It's not even layer one, it's actually layer 0. You need to start from network, from actual sending packets between nodes, and make sure that you don't like flood the network with all the transactions. So imagine like million transactions, even if they like each transaction like 100 bytes, million transactions per second, even like 100,000 transactions per second, that's a lot of traffic that you will pretty much will need to flood the network. So you need to shard that. You need to shard the consensus algorithm and allow pretty much consensuses to be driven. And then you need to actually build the programming model, like the smart contract model needs to be rebuilt in this new world where some of the data may live on the different nodes, right? So this is similar where like when databases switch to sharded database, you actually need to rebuild how the query execution is done.
So Illia, if that's the case, and you're resetting the button right from the grassroots up, from the ground up rather, that means that I would argue that you're proponents of the Web3. You're trying to move into the computerized domain. You know, really focus as Ethereum was on that supercomputer. Talk us through though how you're going to achieve that, given that you started. If we look at in retrospect to other startups, how are you going to surpass what's already been done to really have really come to the fore and showcase what you're able to do?
I mean, a lot of it is, like, as I said, execution. The other part is we really investing in education, and kind of the fact that we're trying to make it really simple to start building and using our blockchain. We want to then educate people, and mostly in blockchain community. Because, like, if you're in blockchain community right now, you probably already bought in, you know, you have a MetaMask installed, you have some crypto, like some coins already. So it's like, it's not as painful for you to start using it. If you are, you know, like somebody who is not in blockchain, or maybe like from, you know, have heard of blockchain, but yeah, pretty much mainstream, right? Like you have no idea. You're used to, you know, clicking a button, sign in with Google, and starting that. That's how you start using applications. So we're trying to get to that experience, but actually have everything decentralized, right? So that's kind of what our main point. And then for that, we actually need to educate developers why they want to build applications on Web3, what features they get, what values they get out of this, and also gives them tools to make that really happen, such that their applications don't suck. So that's kind of what we're really prioritizing on.
So your go-to market strategy is going to be quite important in that instance, and I really want to talk to you about that later. But let's talk about the need for speed now. Obviously, it is a speed race in some instances because it makes it easy to use. How is your testing going with scalability right now?
So right now, we actually we did some analysis, and what we found out that even though you say there's need for speed, the applications that are right now there don't really need that much scale. So that was actually very, very interesting discovery, is that most of the applications who are using blockchain, and this is mostly like around finance stuff, right? That's where blockchain is very like natively applied. The TPS I have is relatively low. What is interesting is that all of them want to make sure that they will be able to scale up, right? And that's kind of the point. So what we kind of decided to do is pretty much do kind of a few step launch, right? So instead of going straight away for the fully sharded system, we actually go to one shard first, then go to like reshard to 10, and then go like free resharding with number of devices, which kind of gives us a little bit more time to like test our sharding. Okay. And that's because sharding is very complex, and it's, you know, you don't want to launch something that is not fully figured out yet. So so that's why right now we're like at one shard, and that's where, you know, like 500 to 1,000 transactions per second. That's kind of a reasonable speed that will satisfy, to start with, a reasonable number of applications. With, you know, at the launch, we already will have a fully sharded like testnet, so people know that we can actually like reshard this later. That's kind of the idea. We call it minimal viable blockchain approach. So essentially, you're really focusing on what the capabilities of that one node is, get to know that really well, and then really build that out and build out the whole sharded system so that it can be. Obviously, these transaction speeds decrease as you increase that. But what you're saying is that fundamentally, it's not the imperative to have that super fast TPS, but a functional system. Exactly. Yeah. It's more about having the like scaling in the future, like being future proof pretty much, versus like having scaling right now. Got it. So let's talk about it in the context of your roadmap for a second. And sorry to interrupt, but what's the plan with regards to what you're saying? You talked about testnet. What are the dates that relate to sort of the evolution of the sharding plan? So I mean, these dates are relatively rough. So we're planning to have our pretty much testnet out end of this month. This is pretty much, you know, like our code is open source, so people can run it right now, but this will be like, we'll have a testnet running on some nodes. We also have like some few partners that will run nodes with us. And we already have IDE for developers to develop the smart contracts on. It's already kind of deploys on DevNet, but like we will build up that, have tooling, documentation, etc., and kind of start actually growing the developer community. And then our plan is to launch what we call minimal viable blockchain, like kind of, as you said, one node that showcases functionality somewhere end of March, beginning of April. And then at that point, we should, as I said, have already a sharded testnet, kind of to just showcase that we can do it. And then we can launch the reshard pretty much that one chain into many chains somewhere like June, July.
Right.
And from there, it's going to just keep growing with the number of devices on the network.
Okay, so I want to talk about that in the context of the ICO landscape. Now, I was planning on talking about this later, but I might as well do it now. Obviously, the narrative has been very controversial. We don't need to go too much into that, but what is your plan specifically with regard, given that there was such a plethora of failed startups, essentially, because obviously the ICO term is overused anyway. They are fundamentally pseudo-securitized or perhaps really securities that haven't really been regulated, but more importantly, they are startups. So you as a startup, what's your plan? Are you considering going in that STO route, or are you considering something else?
So investment-wise, we going all private investment. So like we already have raised a round, and like any future rounds will be private investment. Okay. And mostly because like any public investment creates a lot of kind of possible questions and a lot of legal overheads that as a startup you kind of don't have ability to handle. But we do have like few possible strategies how to distribute tokens to wide masses. Most of them kind of relate to people participating in our network one way or another. Specifically,
sorry to interrupt you. In that context, are you still planning on doing a utility token?
Yes, so it is a utility token. After launch, pretty much, this is a token that you will be able to stake. This is a proof of stake model. So as a validator node, you're staking this token, and it provides you pretty much with a return through a block rewards, right?
Are you concerned at all in that context with the SEC, given that there's a lot of top-down pressure for them to, as I was alleging before or alluding to, is that many of the pre-existing ICOs were essentially securities, and they're cracking down on them, finding some, encourage them most to change or make the switch or redress this problem. Are you concerned at all that you're going to have this, what I call a UTO, that utility token structure built into your plan, even though it isn't necessarily an offering, but you are going to have a utility token as such? Are you concerned that in any way, shape or form that it might not be an actual utility, given that...
So it is pretty, the way we're kind of planning this out, and of course we're working with very great lawyers, is by pretty much making sure that by the time this token is operational, we can argue that this is a utility token, right? And this requires, a proper setup, a lot of things involved into this, including like the network needs to be operated by a nonprofit. This nonprofit should be governed by a body. But this is the type of things actually like going to the governance. This is the type of things that we want to have anyway. So kind of aligning these two things, how we want to operate the network in the future, right, after launch, with what is pretty much the kind of way going forward from like perspective of
right. And Illia, that actually fits quite well with the CFTC, because they've made it clear that you can transition anyway from a security into a commodity as such, or into having some sort of utility. So post mainnet would make sense that is
exactly
possible. Yeah. But let's talk about, though, let's hark back to your investors for a moment. What kinds of investors did you interact with? Were they crypto VCs, or were they traditional capital investors? This is important to know, because what we've seen in the past year is pretty controversial actions from many different VCs in the crypto space. That's why I asked this.
For sure. Yeah, I think like our when we were raising money, our main goal was to get the highest kind of highest quality capital, right? And specifically, we went with MetaStable, which is top crypto VC.
That is.
Electric, which is ran by Elad Gil, who is like a very known entrepreneur here at Silicon Valley, and Avichal, and his co-founder, who also ran startups. So it's like we went for people who both like. If we went to a crypto VC, we went for VCs who have both experience with crypto and startups. So, MetaStable, like it's all people who done startups. It's Naval Ravikant, who, who's still running.
He's pretty famous.
Companies that's investing in a lot of.
Right. And Illia, did you demand that they lock up their investment? This is important, obviously, also because having been involved in the space for a while now and getting to know some VCs, certainly some of them demand to have unlocked access, which is totally disgusting and inappropriate. But they do try. Did that happen for you in any shape or form? And obviously, as you mentioned, quality is paramount. So, is the focus for these investors long term?
Yes, all of them were long term, and pretty much that's how we were selecting the capital we take. Is like everybody who is aligned with us long term. At least 2 year or more kind of alignment after mainnet launch. That was kind of agreement that we had.
I see. So let's talk about now the correlation between the token itself and the anomaly of the speculative environment that is crypto. Once you do launch in the future, how do you remove yourself from that speculative sort of instrument that can become the utility token, so that people just bet on the belief and bet on the growth, the potential growth of its value? How can it really be, again, that utility once it's active and transacted for its use case, rather than just be a speculative instrument?
So right now, I wouldn't say we have a final answer for this. So this is still like a very active research. We have some ideas. Most of them are around different like possible tweaks that the kind of active governance model can do, but also like inflation model. So right now, all of the current blockchains, as far as I know, well, okay, I actually don't remember for some of the newer ones, but like Ethereum, right, it has a fixed block reward, which doesn't grow with the number of with the total supply, which means it actually reduces, which like incentivizes some behavior. So the one possibility is actually the inflation is a percentage of the total supply at any moment, right?
Okay.
Which is kind of similar to how inflation is done on any current regular
model, right?
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
And you can actually make it such that it's actually adjusts a little bit depending on some parameters, right? And what this allows to do is actually to incentivize people on one side, pretty much participate in the network, not just trade, but actually participate. And on the other hand, just like buying it and not participating and not selling it or like not using it is actually disincentivized, because you're losing fair bit yearly of your value of the tokens. So like balancing these things out, and again, as I said, this is like making this work in a total network. This is extremely hard, and we've talking with a few of the economists, world best economists about this, and like this is still active research, but figuring this out and like balancing it out, I think this is how we can make the token actual utility and kind of incentivize people actually using this instead of
speculating
it for the sake of it. Yeah,
sure. So I would thank you for mentioning that, because I wanted to talk to you about that whole HODL philosophy. Are you averse to that with regard to the whole point and premise that you stand for when it comes to the release of your token? Would it be fair to say that you ideally would like to see a little bit more stability in the way that the token is used, given that it's supposed to be a marker of literal use, rather than something that people simply just buy in the hope that it will increase its value to sell later?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like just the fact, like the inflation fact and like proof of stake. So part of it, we're trying to make that actually being a validator is really easy. So right now, it's really hard to be a validator. You need like expensive hardware if you want to do proof of work. like some of the newer networks that are trying to launch proof of stake, they actually like require a huge like high availability setup, etc. So we're trying to like make that as simple as possible, so that even if you are holding some tokens, you should be like then giving back, right? You should be validating the network and actually producing blocks, and then then you're actually an active participant. Versus if you're just holding tokens for the sake of it, well, then you will be losing, as I said, losing value because like of the inflation.
Right.
So yeah, so that's kind of the target we have.
So it's quite a novel sort of approach, because really to date we've seen little done in terms of praxis with regard to really incentivizing constant utilization of a protocol and of a blockchain. But let's talk about the allusions you made to your proof of stake. You have a unique design too. Talk us through that consensus mechanism and why you sort of decided on this approach.
So, I mean, proof of stake, I think, is relatively, proof of work is definitely not something that should be going forward. And actually, part of the reason why I got into blockchain only this year is because, when I've heard about Bitcoin, I always got stuck on the proof of work, and I'm like, that makes no sense to me. I don't want to participate in this kind of wasteful energy consumption just for the sake of producing something that we hope will, get more priced, right? This is the speculation, spending energy for the sake of speculation kind of thing didn't make any sense to me. And then I learned about proof of stake, just well, that makes a lot of sense. It actually was November 2017, and then kind of through learning more and more until we actually got into discussing about blockchain. That's where well, this is a mechanism of the future. This is where the shareholders of the system, other users of the system, all those things align. And then kind of going more into details, right? The consensus algorithm is pretty much allows people to what we're trying to achieve is the other thing about current EOS, for example, is a proof of stake system, right? But the whole point of EOS is to drive up and figure out the wealthiest individuals and let them run the network, right?
That's right.
And that makes no sense. I mean, this is wealthy get wealthier, pretty much, kind of.
It's no different to the model of banks. It's centralized, it's hierarchical.
Exactly, yeah. So what we're trying to, and actually proof of work is also leading to the same thing, right? Ethereum has 63 active block producers. That over the last, I think, 2 years, it didn't actually change much. 63 unique block producers, because there's 63 pools who are actually producing blocks. And this is not even though there's maybe few thousand nodes who are actually mining, but there's only 63 things that actually putting the blocks out.
Right.
And again, this is not this is not what we're thinking about decentralization. And three of that biggest pools actually have 51 or 52% of the whole hash power.
Right, and I think that's good to note, because we saw with the hash wars of the BCH camps as well, we saw what came to the fore was the fact that early entrance, even in that proof of work model, was problematic for the rest of the participants because it was unjust. The imbalance is there.
Yeah. So what we're trying to achieve, and we call it threshold with proof of stake, is actually that if you're above some threshold, and this threshold is constantly recalculating to accommodate as many people as possible, you can actually be a validator and you don't need to pool, right? So even if you have let's say 10 tokens to stake, that should be enough for you to have one seat for the validation, and it's predictable, and you get a certain percentage, right? If you have 100 tokens, well, you get 10 times more seats, and again, it's the same percentage on your 100 tokens. So it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, you will get always the same kind of instrument. And
so that's where the fairness comes in that threshold component. And talk us through the TXFlow component that you've designed as well, because that's relevant to what you're saying.
Yes. So TXFlow, this is designed mostly by Alex, Max, and Misha. The general idea is pretty much how can we make that instead of there's a leader that produces a block, right? And that's kind of what all of the current systems do, right? And this leader can do whatever they want, right? They can censor however as they want. They can, reorder transactions and whatnot. And the point being that we assume there's leader turning, and then there's economical incentives, etc. Instead of doing that, how can we make that bunch of people come together and agree on set of transactions in order without being able to influence each other, right? So that's what TensorFlow does. It's a DAG-based algorithm where, let's say, 100 validators in one shard are communicating with each other, and this is like a semi-random process where they like send pieces of the DAGs they know at the moment to others and kind of update it and grow as the more transactions coming in the system. And at the end, you can compute a property on this DAG which says that everybody in the network saw that this is a set of transactions and this is their order. So it's not just like this guy said, hey, this is a transactions, trust me. But it's actually like everybody can observe this. There's kind of proofs, signatures, etc. And if something happened, like something went, like somebody tried to do something wrong, you can actually prove it because here's their signature and here's the other signatures that are conflicting. You can slash them, etc. Right. So again, it's trying to be like way more fair, and also this helps with scaling, because now instead of you sending transactions to every one of them, you just need to send it to one, and he will communicate to others. So that's kind of, again, like reorganizing. It's like integrating consensus into layer 0 as well, and like making sure these things work all together. And
it's certainly driving that efficiency because it does only work on that one node. That is pretty substantial, considering that some of these projects that have sharding have substantial numbers of nodes and do not operate in this way. So it's really quite exhaustive in their design. So it's something that I really found interesting when I read about the TensorFlow. But let's now talk about the contrastive and comparative analysis that you guys have done. I've seen the chart with regard to the likes of other top tier projects. Talk us through some of them and why you think you're right on track to lead the way, even though you're coming from behind.
So I think like there's a set of projects that already launched and kind of operating. All of them, if you see what happened, they all dramatically slowed down after launch, right? Only a few of them were actually very like on track with delivering. And even then they kind of like slowly became less, they became reluctant to change protocol.
Lackluster, that's for sure. Some of them haven't even released yet as well, Illia.
Yeah, so then there's a second set of protocols, that raised a lot of money, build a lot of hype, but then haven't like actually been producing a lot of even updates, right, to know how their protocol evolving. Yeah. And I mean, part of actually we're doing this whiteboarding series where we're talking with people who are building these protocols and both learning about them and trying to figure out what's the best way to collaborate with many protocols.
So in that sense, are you, with regard to this discussion, are you actually considering in the future doing that cross-chain or perhaps some sort of collaborative alliance with other top-tier projects?
I think for sure, like we want to share like ideas and be like have a mind alliance. I think that is true for like actual protocol communication. We have some ideas how to do like bridging between protocols. I mean, it's very similar to what like Cosmos and Polkadot have for their like cross-chain information, like exchange, and it should allow some of the like value transfer and data transfer. But like generally, at least my opinion right now, and like I've been like. Not a lot of people don't agree with me, but like right now I feel like this blockchains have such a huge network effect when the experience is done right, that at the end, like whoever will get the experience nailed, that is who is gonna actually kind of grow and evolve into the future. So and that's two things. It's like one thing is you cannot get experience right from first try. I mean, this is why we're doing hackathons, right? Like we build something, but like until you actually try to use it as a user, you don't know how it actually feels, right? And this is where we really want to figure out a model where we will keep updating our blockchain with very like active cadence and kind of.
And what's interesting. And what's interesting, sorry to interrupt again, but I've noticed that you have this strong affiliation with Web3 as an ideal and also just as an entity in itself. And you also have core values that you represent. And one of them is that transparency. We don't need to go into that, it's self-explanatory. But then there's this practical decentralization. And I found that quite interesting because of that additional word of practicality. What do you mean by that? What's the agenda built into that? And how do you build that into this fanatical usability? You know, you really stress that is the imperative is making it practical for real world adoption on a massive scale.
Yeah, so I mean, practical here means is at the moment right now, I mean, given people are not on blockchain means people don't care about decentralizations that much, right? I mean, and like we see, you know, it's slowly growing there, and like people, you know, not happy with Facebook doing this kind of things, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't need to solve every single point and like make it, you know, a like fanatic, you know, I'm never, you know, I have no footprint on any other external service, et cetera, right? We don't need
like
to solve
a libertarian sort of idealistic sort of model.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't need to like optimize for idealistic case and for idealists. Instead, what we're trying to do is to build like a path, which is I'm a user right now of Facebook. How can I like learn about blockchain, start using things, get a hang of like what is actually owning my own data and my own assets and my own like, you know, having this digital money like working for me. And then like, oh, actually I can, you know, use a Brave browser. And then, hey, I actually can like not use any of this centralized services. So like, and this may involve, you know, we will build like a couple of centralized services that we run that kind of aid people in this process, right? That's what it means, right?
Right.
Like at the end, there's a decentralized blockchain that, you know, operates and is fair, but like the path may involve few kind of very like practical.
And the biggest challenge is going to be exposure, because obviously you want people to experience, as you said, this kind of practicality. But how do you get that reach? I mean, you've worked for Google, you know they have substantial reach. That's part of the reason why they are so successful, because of their strategy in itself. How do you, you know, break that crypto bridge and move into that mainstream sector? What strategies are you using specifically, whether it be universities, whether it be devs, whether it be hackathons? What's that real key approach to try and infiltrate that?
So we're planning all of those things you said.
Right.
So we're planning to go, you know, universities, definitely like clubs, both like computer science clubs, you know, design, like you mentioned, we have this series on YouTube, and we're doing it here in San Francisco, where we're discussing not just like for developers, but also like for design, for product people, like how can you build products that are decentralized, how you can design for this new world. So like expanding education across all kinds of boundaries. And then of course, like, you know, going after developers wherever they are, hackathons, tutorials, like perfect documentation, you know, that covers all the use cases, and like going after that, making sure that they see this, that they can build things, that they get support they need, and then like making sure that they can actually deploy these applications and get users. And that's the part, like get users and users can like adopt it easily is where the adoption comes from, right? Like even if we get a lot of devs, but what they build is not used, this is not gonna like sustain itself, right? So we actually need to like make sure that what they build is successful, and that's what we're gonna optimize for.
So you're leading the revolution right now, Illia, trying to really change the game and convince people through quality that this is plausible and can be done for the future. We're talking about a long roadmap ahead for the potential of this whole industry, and you're right at the forefront. Well, let's talk about that in the current stage of your development right now. You did start pretty late, as I'd mentioned. Is it fair to say it was a 2017 project?
No, it's actually a 2018 project.
2018, okay. So more to the point. You know, you started quite late. So what kind of hours are you guys putting in to really catch up? And what stage of development are you at now?
I mean, I think like, you know, it's a San Francisco hours. So
right.
But I mean, like, I think we're executing at a very, very good pace. Of course, you know, we're still growing a team, and if anybody's interested in joining us, please email us. It's going from, you know, engineers to community people, developer relations, pretty much, and everything between that. And yeah, I mean, like we're trying to kind of every day we're like, what else can we do to scale this up, right?
Right.
That's kind of how we.
Well, there's no question that you do have a very standout team. You are young, yes, but you have gold medalists in the field of what you do, essentially, and that's substantial in itself. But let's talk about your intentions for hiring. I think you're advertising for hiring now. Your team is growing, is that right?
For sure, yes.
Okay. So in a nutshell, what's your primary assets with regard to the team? Is it the engineering sector? You have a lot of them, or what's the core, focus of the team, or is it diversifying?
I mean, I think like our engineering, top notch, and we want to keep growing that, right? There's still a lot of work, and like making the, great best developer experience is great. We got on board a full-time designer who helps us a lot with like getting the experience to actual end users better, and like iterating on that. We do need a lot more help with like building the community and developers and organizing hackathons. So that like big push on was kind of bringing people like marketing and community, etc. And then a huge kind of thing that we're working on right now is like growing developer relationship role, right? So this is like, we need more tutorials and documentation, right? And that needs to be a person who is like bridging the gap between developers and like between external developers and internal developers, right?
I see.
Who's actually like circulating and
trying to bring people in, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk about now the anomaly of sponsored content, the pay for play model that we see rife in crypto. What are your thoughts on that? We see that consistently with a lot of people who perhaps don't understand technology. They're representing the crypto space, speaking, for the people, but being paid to do so. What are your thoughts on this? Is it even an issue?
I'm very like pretty against that kind of stuff, and this goes from like from paid influencers to even like paying developers to come on board. I mean, I totally understand the need to support like projects and the need to support like if somebody's building an open source piece of software, they need money to actually like pay the bills, right? So there's no problem there. But like what some of the projects doing, where they're literally like paying people to like build on their platform for kind of as almost like as contractors, that type of thing. Like the problem is that it's not validating that what you're building is the right thing, right? It's not giving you the feedback that you need.
And do you think it's really thwarted the true nature and value of a lot of these projects we've seen? Because a lot of them are doing that. They're paying perhaps the wrong people to send the wrong message, when in fact they should be focusing on their own technology. Do you think that it's thwarted the whole value proposition for some of these projects compared to what your ideals are, your focus, which is obviously do the work first?
Well, I mean, I don't want to judge other projects like per se, because like their go-to strategy, because for some of them it worked financially at least very well. I think like at least from perspective of building a startup, and like we've been doing this for the last couple of years, is unless you're actually getting like signal from the market, then what you're building will, you can infuse how much money you can, but at the end it will not succeed, right? So only things that actually like driven by like market, then product, and then technology, like seems like that's what that works, right? That and this goes from like lean startup strategy to every single thing that every single speaker in Silicon Valley says, right?
Sure. But to interrupt there, though, what I mean is, do you think that hype, the precepts of hype, have been paramount and to the detriment of even the listener, the purchaser, the interactor, the user? Have we been seduced by these narratives, these false narratives of value, when perhaps they should have been focusing quite realistically on their actual their technology?
I mean, it's hard.
We see evidence of this. That's why I'm pushing this.
I mean, I definitely think it definitely was overhyped. Like that is pretty clear. It's pretty clear that people spend more time on hype than on building things. But that said,
more on bullshit, more on bullshit, less on real stuff.
Yeah. So some people didn't do it, and they were like slowly building their own thing. So but like it's always the people who are like don't execute, but actually just do hype. They always are more loud than people who actually execute.
I agree.
That is like a natural effect. And
well, it's a very safe answer, and I appreciate that. I'll push you, in the right direction I want you to go next time we talk. But let's now talk about STOs, KYC. I want to talk about that in the context of your view on them. You mentioned you're going to release a utility token that has real utility, but do you still regard STOs as relevant for this next wave of movement in the space?
I mean, I think like generally STOs are definitely relevant. I think there's a lot of interesting applications you can do as like, if it's a real security token, if everybody understands what it entails, and it's like, actually like went through all the proper legal phases, it's still a way easier to operate with that than, with actual like securities that issued by, filing S3, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like the current system, like if you know like how current like custody models work, et cetera, for current securities, right? They involve a physical safes, three-party like interaction. There's a law from 1934, I think, that it like regulates that. So that seems like a little bit outdated and
just a little.
Yeah, and for sure, like if you want to do any kind of like some of the folks we're talking with, they want to do a venture fund which is tokenized, where you can actually tokenize the LP position. And this is a security token for sure, and it needs to be like handled with the proper care. But at the same time, it maybe allows to have a lot more interesting models, how to like fund capital, what kind of like reporting you can have about the companies, etc., and like build a protocol around like how people can invest into new things in a more decentralized way, right? So this is like making it more fair and accessible.
Right. So, but in that context, do you think that given that STOs are regulated essentially from the top down, does that remove some of the value of the narrative of decentralization, or does it really even matter, given that the core focus of quality teams is often about distribution?
I think like, I mean, we live in a real world, right? It's not, again, it's a practical, it should be practical. It shouldn't be like, at some point we'll figure out, and like we change to a world where like everything is decentralized, and we have like more efficient mechanics around making decisions around laws. But at the same time, right now we are at this state. So if we can, like, complying to the law is kind of given, and then figuring out what we can do with that, and actually like we can do a lot of things with while being compliant that are way more optimal, right? And like Web 2 examples, like like startups like iShares, right? They grew from like a couple people team to I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue company, and they're just like optimizing some of the like share stuff before going public, right? So this is like a smallest chunk of the functionalities that you can like implement on a blockchain in like a couple of days. This is like $100 million company. So imagine now how many more things you can actually put in while being compliant on the blockchain, like, and build the companies around that.
Right.
And then when we have the system already kind of more migrated from the this old way of dealing with safes, etc., to kind of new ways, then we can start pushing, like figuring out where does the law actually breaks, and why is this things work and doesn't, right? Because like laws that are there also for a reason, right? It's not like they were just put there because people wanted to do.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So really it's about being compliant with the laws that be, and perhaps they may evolve, but your point is, not to be idealistic, but run with the rules and the laws of the day and do the best you can. But let's now talk about dataization. That was a term I heard coined with one of your colleagues. Why data? What's the imperative of data when we see this evolution of money essentially from the barter through to today? And how does that relate again to the value of NEAR with regard to data?
So, I mean, the way kind of we think about data is like users should own their data across the board, right? Like this should be not like an application gives you permission to use your data for something and then they use it for everything they want, right? It should be you giving permission to applications to use your data.
Right.
So that's kind of like a mindset. And then from there, like there's few different levels how this can progress. We're, only scratching the surface at this moment. Like, the futuristic designs that, I have in mind, which again, we're like, this is just kind of high level research, is like, you actually can deploy, like, I mean, I've been doing machine learning for the last 10 years. And like one problem with machine learning is that you actually need to have you need to know how you collected the data to be able to use it for machine learning. So like some of the protocols right now who say like, oh, machine learning on blockchain, you don't need to see any data. You just deploy your code and it works. That doesn't work. What I think will work is you set up applications that are deployed on the user devices. They collect the data you want. It stays on user devices, and you can then build machine learning models across these devices as well in a privacy-preserving way, which benefits all of the users, right? So it's kind of the idea where user owns their data, and then they give permission other applications to use it. At the same time, it's fully anonymized when it's collected back, and it's like useful for everybody in the system.
Right.
That's kind of like a future we're working towards. I think like, any machine learning on blockchain right now, it's way too early to talk about it. Like we haven't figured out like basic infrastructure yet, like, scaling, being able to build like regular applications. And then the next level would be like, how can we like make sure that users control their data across all these applications? Some of it can be actually done on layer 1 and should be done on layer 1. For example, figuring out in such way that user can see and access data that they have in any other application, right? Right now in Ethereum, your data actually is in many other contracts, right? And that is very hard, like to query, to find. You maybe don't even know if it's stored there, even though it's like it's all transparent, it's there, but like finding it and like accessing it is hard. So like this kind of things, like figuring out how to organize that is where kind of like first steps are towards that way.
Absolutely. And then there's also the possibility that the real killer app is actually this hidden blockchain itself when it's seamless to the user. And in that context, given this future plan you have, how are you also trying to garner interest in those developers who may want to onboard onto Near? Have you already had any discussions with those who are potentially considering it, or are we way too early yet?
I mean, for onboarding, like we have kind of a relatively straightforward plan. I mean, we have about a dozen interested developers who we're talking with, who are pretty excited about what we're building and interested to kind of start trying it in the short term. But yeah, the idea is, we will have a bunch of, quick start and tutorials where people can start. We'll have workshops around San Francisco and kind of cities in US first, probably in China and maybe a few other locations as well, where we will kind of walk through how to build applications and then have like a half day type of like hacking on people can start like building applications and kind of go from there.
I see. And what about enterprise as well? Because often it's dichotomized in that sense of the dev user, the independent who's, considering developing something. But then there's those really well-established institutions that want to utilize you as well, potentially. Are you going to engage at that level as well, like we've seen with the likes of those closed databases of R3, Quorum, etc.?
So we have engaged. They have a very interesting like kind of use cases that they some of them don't really require blockchain, so they want to use blockchain for the sake of it.
But just a database, really.
Yeah, but there is actually some interesting use cases, and so we have this design which I've been meaning to publish on the Medium, and it's called private shard. What it is pretty much a mechanics where instead of, so like our usual sharding runs, nodes and all the public, and we rotate verifiers between them. But you can also spin up a shard, which is just run by, for example, an enterprise. And it can, it still has, like it checks in the Merkle root of the state of the shard into the public blockchain. So you can still prove a lot of things when you communicate with other entities about the information stored there. And you can have a balance on that node. You can have a lot of things. And inside that, you can have anything, like whatever the enterprise wants happening, right? But now you can have many, like different enterprises having these private shards communicating with each other through like encrypted channels while still kind of using the same piece of software, right? So they can have like pretty much a database. I mean, again, blockchain is database, but which has this new, like, it has cryptography, it has money, it has the assets, and it has this ability of communicating with other entities on the same protocol without like building, 5 pipelines in MuleSoft to.
That's very interesting, because you're not only creating a conduit or a hybrid version of the public chain to private chain, but you're also doing potentially cross collaborations with private chains itself. So in that sense, you're making it really attractive to the enterprise by doing that. And there is an argument put forth recently that there is an imperative for a public chain to exist, for all of this to work. Would you agree, given that you are a public chain, that that is the most important part of any successful implementation to date?
Yes, but I'm biased. I think like just private chains don't really make sense. So a hybrid chain, yes, where some of the data is hidden, but you have a way to prove a lot of things through the private chain. That's kind of the future will be.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that in the context of use case. Now, there's a lot discussed right now about predominant use cases, but really a lot of it is not, I wouldn't say bullshit, but a lot of it isn't proven yet. There's no empirical evidence to suggest that we can ascertain that these verticals particularly are the ones that will be the forefront of use case and applications. What are your thoughts on that? We hear the discussions of gaming and gambling and real estate or STOs or, derivatives, all kinds of things. But how can we move beyond the conversation and start to prove use case?
I mean, I think like part of it is going from use case, not from like blockchain.
Right.
So like we're talking with a few entrepreneurs who are coming from use case, and they think the blockchain is a good solution for the use case, and they pretty much trying. Part of it is like people, as you mentioned, have been spent time hyping and not much time building. So that's a big part. I mean, the other big part is really hard to build on existing systems. So making it really easy to build and prototype. Like I've talked with a few people who are like, yeah, we're prototyping, in Ethereum. It's taking us like 3 months. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. Prototyping should be taking you like maybe a weekend or something, right?
But earlier they may not have won all the gold medals that your team have won.
I mean, I've tried to build for Ethereum, and
right. Okay.
It is quite hard, right? So
okay. So in that respect as well, how's your interface? If I wanted to go and explore the GitHub as well and look at all the different opportunities to see the repository and all the developments there, and also your interface in its ease of use, what would your feedback be?
It's all. I mean, everything on GitHub. We have a IDE. It's studio.nearprotocol.com. This is like a full-on integrated where you can start writing smart contracts, interact from like JavaScript with that smart contract. You can see you can build a full app pretty much in that studio, and then you can deploy it from there to the DevNet right now. And then, as we roll out testnet, it will deploy to testnet. So this is one-stop shop for you to start building stuff. And again, the tutorials are coming within a few weeks where we'll walk you through how to build, a crypto zombie contract, as well as how to build maybe something more complex. And so this is kind of a good starting point. And then, of course, we have our GitHub repo for the client itself, where, you can build it, you can play with it from a command line. There's JavaScript and Python tools to interact with it. And of course, starting to contribute to the client is the best way to actually learn about blockchain.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's a lot happening, and there's no question that it's active. I have had a look, and all of you seem to be always on there. So moving forward, Illia, with regard to the moving trends, one of the things your colleague mentioned in a recent discussion was that there's a propensity for certain regions of the globe to really authorize the next trend, namely Singapore, Switzerland, Japan, Europe. Enterprise custody is focused there. Institutional capital is certainly coming to the fore, and scammers are moving out. So in that sense, can you talk us through some of the trends you see in this sort of narrative of new money coming in and consolidated, trustable interests also moving and strengthening the space?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have like a huge insight on like institutional investment and kind of general market making moving in. It's definitely, it's happening. There's like every day there's, more people like accepting Bitcoin or trying to like invest in new crypto, like in the crypto on kind of institutional side, or like building blockchain. I think like from kind of more like investment wise, there's been a huge boom in 2018, but it's kind of like, I think it's equalizing and like becoming more like people actually investing in projects that make sense as
sure. And in that context, I want to ask you, do you think that majority of up and coming startups, including yourselves, as you hit the market, the secondary market with your the ground running, do you think that there's a requirement to have BTC as that in parallel sort of currency in operation? Because right now we see a lot of reliance on this narrative of altcoins versus BTC. But do you think that's going to change in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like my personal opinion is that BTC is not the future for sure. And like, I don't think there's a good way of
stating that. So you're saying there's a decoupling going to happen and there'll be a focus on independent companies?
Yeah, I for sure think that like the networks that actually provide value and like become usable by mainstream, that's where like there will be more and more interest and value will be accruing there. And then Bitcoin definitely has its own like niche to stay. I don't think at this point it's not going to go away anytime soon, but it's also not, I don't think it's going to be evolving into something more than it is right now. And then if there is some way of like building, let's say Near becomes a like future computing platform of future, right? And everybody uses it. Well, building a Bitcoin like, a token on top of it, which, it may require some additional functionality, but has like limited supply, et cetera, like you can do it. And like, if people can use that for store of value and like similar things, then what is the value of like having this very expensive to operate and very...
It's a good point. And in that context, are you going to be vetting the projects that do onboard and utilize yours? Because that's going to be very time consuming in the future if you roll out to have, a vast number of projects and apps utilizing your...
I think the way we want to kind of go forward is that we'll have a kind of a board on the nonprofit that runs the network. And that board has like I call it a Congress. So it's a set of people who should be representing one way or another the stakeholders. So pretty much token holders. And these people are, it should be like people who have academic background, people who have influence in the community, developers that build applications that, scalable, and like maybe large node runners, etc. And they can be like, if there is some concerns about, let's say there is some applications that are really disruptive to the network, right? And that can be like something that's illegal, something that is really destroying the network in some way. So this is the bodies that can actually like do the governance around that. Right. And then the way we kind of look at our company is the company that actually builds the network, right? The company that builds and maintains the network, where we just keep advancing the protocol. So we're not trying to, in any way govern it from a perspective of like who and what applications. We're more of a like, what is the best technology we can build in next, 6 months, and build that and ship it and
as the supporting platform to really not have the decree from the top down who should and who shouldn't. That makes a lot of sense, and that aligns with your stance on decentralization. I guess in that respect, I want to talk to you, hark back to the whole plan for your token, in the sense that have you finalized the number of your token or in that tokenomic design? And is that finite now, or are you still working these things out?
We're still working these things out, and mainly because like what we're optimizing for is quite complex, and actually nobody have done any reasonable research on this. Like everybody just either copied an existing system or like did kind of like, let's try this and see what happens. And the thing is like almost everything else can be changed. Like a consensus can be changed, network can be changed, state machine can be changed, like tokens and governance. That's like, I mean, governance can advance itself, but like tokenomics is like what defines kind of if this protocol will able to succeed. So like putting a lot of work and figuring out exact details. So we're spending a lot of time just trying to like put it all together. Absolutely.
Well, on a final point, I wanted to ask you very directly, Illia, thank you very much for your time also. It's been really comprehensive. But are you bullish? Are you bullish on the space? It might seem like a loaded question, but are you confident that you can actually be something real and not just be something that has an idea and has a group of gold medalists that are all getting together with their big brains and creating something that's theoretical but can't actually get to, can't really reap the benefits? What is your point? What is your discussion point on that?
So I mean, I'm for sure bullish. I'm for sure like believe we can build something real and like very soon. And that's kind of our point. Is just like we want to ship it and then iterate, not like try to build something perfect and then die somewhere in the middle. And that again, we are all very practical. We've built pieces like software for the last 10 years or something. Each independently of us built and shipped software for 10 years. So, and kind of like the way we approach it is this is a developer platform that has like this interaction with the user. This is not a platform for people to speculate on price and like
right.
So that's kind of like we're talking with people who build like other development platforms and trying to learn from them how to do it right. Like when we talk with any kind of anybody, we're like trying to figure out have they done this before in non-blockchain world and what we can learn from that and kind of apply it. So that's kind of how we're thinking.
And are you talking with significant partner interests? Are there plans for other partners to onboard and expand your network in the future?
In what sense?
In the sense of, as we alluded to before, with enterprise interests. But is there any party at all, whether it be a mainstream, it might be a traditional investor of some kind that has some way of aligning with you, with their vision? Is there any discussions had with regard to potential partnerships with the future?
Not well. I mean, we are having open conversations with enterprises, but nothing that like
nothing concrete yet.
Nothing concrete yet. Yeah, mostly we're talking with like individual developers and smaller companies who are really excited about building novel businesses, right?
Right.
Those were impossible to do before.
Well, on that note, Illia, thank you very much for your time. I'm excited for you because you are all about the business of decentralization. You're all getting together as a very effective team and trying to build this out. I like your slogan of a non-shitcoin. I think that's appropriate in your case, given what you're trying to do. And I wish you all the very best. Hopefully we can talk again in coming months to get an update of your progress. There's a lot to come this year for you. You guys move very fast. That's one thing I did note when I spoke with Alex. But for now, all the very best as you build out the sharding tech, as you gain the community interest, as you get the community support and get the attention of, most importantly, the users who are really going to uphold the value of your whole ecosystem. So thanks very much for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks. Really appreciate you interviewing me.
No worries. Thanks, Illia.